What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. With the beta window for the First Descendant having just recently closed, I wanted to create a video to discuss some of the things which impressed me from this beta, the good, some of the things which are less impressive or problematic, the bad, and then lastly one particular item which I think could potentially be worrisome or could become an issue as we get closer to the launch of this and we find out more exactly about what the First Descendant is going to bring to the table. Now, starting us off, and because I want the overall sentiment of this video to be positive and hopeful, I think we can look at the things which I enjoyed the most out of the beta. And first and foremost, I think we can all agree that the most important thing that a looter shooter is supposed to do well is the gunplay, and the First Descendant nails this in my opinion. And we have a large amount of weapons on display here, ranging from hand cannons, handguns, submachine guns, machine guns, auto rifles, pulse rifles, scout rifles, sniper rifles, and I'm bastardizing a lot of the names here, but I'm trying to get the point across that there is a lot of weapons here. All of these weapons have multiple different types within its genre, so to speak, so you can have different kinds of submachine guns that shoot differently, but more importantly, all of these control different, feel different, have different recoil patterns, and overall also sound different. So this is a huge accomplishment from their side, because since this is such an integral part of the game, it is important that it is fun, that it feels crisp, it feels responsive, and also feels different enough to the point where you will look for different weapons because you like the feel of a triple shotgun versus a single shotgun, for example. Next, I can say that one of the things that concerned me when I found it out originally was the fact that Nexon wanted to have so many different playable classes in the game, having 10 available at launch and more coming eventually as the game, ages. The idea for me was that most likely we would see a lot of these characters sharing certain abilities and a lot of characters playing similarly to each other. And that wasn't really the case in all of the ones which I tried in the beta. So I'd definitely say that in terms of this character identity that Nexon wanted to do, they absolutely nailed that. Now, that's not to say that in the characters that come post-launch or the ones that we might not have seen yet, this might not be the case. But for me, playing an Ajax was completely different to playing a Bunny. And so all of these characters had their own unique ways of playing them. Now, I will say still that obviously I think most of us would have preferred a looter shooter where yes, we pick a class and yes, we pick a character, but then we can start messing around with the skills and maybe have a choice from a pool of 7 or 8 skills and then taking in some of them in like we see in games like Destiny and Outriders. But certainly that's not the case here. Here you have a character, it has some abilities, you unlock these abilities up until level 7, and those are the abilities that you are, quote unquote, stuck with. The only thing that you can really change with the character is the cosmetics. At least that's as much as we know right now. Overall, it seems that this might be going almost in a Warframe direction, and that brings me on to an interesting point, and that is that I feel like this game is somehow like the Destiny 2 Warframe baby. And so it's very difficult to compare this game to a game like Outriders, but exceedingly easy to compare it to the Warframe model and the Destiny model and pulling out sort of like the best of those two. So I think what we'll end up here with is in the end, 30, 40 different, characters, and each one of them have different abilities. And so therefore, when you play a bunny plays completely different to an Ajax, and that is really the variety that you can seek out in the game. And again, a long story short, just closing back to the thing that I enjoyed is that they were able to maintain this character identity across at least all of the classes which I tried. And then finally, something which was a real big surprise to me was just the general engagement from the developer, especially seen during this beta window. So essentially this beta was running for about a week, and it was open to a fairly wide audience. There was a Discord where people were constantly offering up advice to, trying out this, trying out that. And in essence, there was a lot with this game at the beginning that people were complaining with. I'm certainly not going to summarize all of it here, but let's use something like graphics optimization as an example. Now, when this game dropped originally, when the beta came out that first day, there was bare bones graphical settings available for this. And so people were coming up with console commands as to how to disable things like motion blur, which was causing a big issue for a lot of people, and just a whole bunch of other things. Now, me personally, I found it incredibly difficult to get the game to run at a sustained frame rate that does not mattering on what I was doing. So in certain cases, I could always get, let's say 120. In certain cases, I would dip below 60, and I really couldn't figure out what it was. And since there were little knobs and stuff for me to mess around with, I couldn't figure that out. Now, long story short, during the course of the beta, they actually had maintenance windows where they added in some of these features, originally just adding in motion blur being able to be toggled on and off, and then eventually adding in pretty much all the settings that you generally expect in a game of this kind, or at least in a game that's coming out these days, allowing you to further customize that. Needless to say, the way that which I played the game the first and the second day of the beta, and how I was struggling with this frame rate issue, definitely, you know, sorted itself out by the end. And I still think obviously that there's some optimization needed there, and I'm going to discuss that when we get to the bad parts. But the issue, or rather the point that I'm trying to make here, is that this studio, this developer, was looking at all of the comments. They were looking at the things that the people were complaining with, and that they could address within the beta window. They did. Again, I don't see that a lot, and I recently I've been in a few betas. Recently I've played a lot of these, and you know, I also keep track of betas of games that I don't get into. And generally speaking, betas are like a one and done kind of thing. The developer puts it out, and anything they might have missed, anything that's fucked up, they just kind of go, well, you know, it's a fucking beta, so you know, you got to do what you got to do. We'll see you guys at the full release. That was certainly not the case here. Developer was super invested in all of this, to the point of 2 days before the beta ending, just dumping a shitload of extra crafting materials and things like that on the players to essentially have them go ape shit and upgrade as much stuff as they could, and essentially try to push, you know, their characters in the way that they might not have been able to farm them up to at that point. And just in general, yes, I know it's beta time, and it is a time for them to make a name for themselves and to prove them out, but still, I give them the fucking flowers. I think it was the right way to approach this incredible hands-on thing. They went on and apologized for actually having maintenance windows through the beta and everything like that, but all of that just showed me a developer which was really interested in their product, which was really interested in our perception of their product, and essentially, you know, the things which are bothering us, the things we'd like to change, and the things we'd like to improve. Now, shifting gears over to the things which were bad or which were unimpressive about this beta, and also with the same time me mentioning that most likely a huge amount of these things, the majority of what I'm about to talk about now, is probably going to be looked at and addressed. At the very least, there was some form of indication from Nexon's side that this is something that they would look at. Now, first and foremost here, the optimization for this game is very poor, and that's to be expected, and it's also kind of like explained by the fact that they only did a Steam beta, so they didn't try to release this on consoles as a beta or anything like that. And that clearly shows you that there's a lot of optimization and a lot of things that they still need to look at here. During the beta, as just mentioned previously, they did look at ways of improving the graphics and all of that, but certainly that still hasn't sorted out the majority of the issues when it comes to graphical optimization and so forth. Further, I mean, I can just look at the footage that I recorded at the beginning of the beta towards the end, and I could also see how choppy those recordings were, so it's very easy for me to track how these little changes and things that they did, and then allowing us to actually mess around with those settings affected this. But fully, I expect there's a whole lot more of this still needing to be done. And now, I want to stack next to optimization, I also want to talk about polish. I know they're not the same thing, I know that, but I didn't want to make 2 points covering these two things and just, you know, look like I'm slagging the game off and just having people going, yeah, dude, it's a fucking beta, of course it's going to be rough. So the polish here that I'm referring to, and I'm going to use one example specifically, and this might just be a full measure thing, and I fucking take that on the chin, but in the game, when you are shooting your guns, right, then, and this might not even be polish in your mind, but it certainly is in mine. When you are shooting your weapons and you run out of ammo, your character will have a audio feedback to that. Like, for example, when you finish your mag, it'll go, oh, not again, and then slap in a new mag. Or they'll just grunt, or they'll just, you know, shriek or something like that. And this, of course, depends on whichever character you're playing with, what they're saying. So at least it's not the same fucking line on all the characters, but they all do this. The problem with this is, if you are playing this game for an hour, 2, 3, 4, that shit gets really old really fast. And the only way that a developer would know this is if they put this in front of a whole bunch of people, and hopefully people give them that feedback and say, Jesus, we don't want this guy to complain every time he reloads his weapon as if it's the first time that this character realizes that weapons need reloading. Now, again, I know that this is a fucking weird thing to hop on about, but it frustrated me to the point where I actually added it to this list. And so the feedback, the character feedback and stuff like that, that is something that needs to be looked at being introduced. And this again is just one example. This kind of like polish towards release is where you look at these sorts of things which might have seemed like a good idea at some point, and then you just kind of realize like nobody wants to listen to that the entire time. Secondly, looking at the fact that this game is primarily focused on a huge amount of character classes eventually being available in the game, 30, 40, 50, whatever that number is going to end up being a couple of years or a year after release of the game. I do feel, however, that what we will potentially end up with is a case of quantity and not quality. And this is pure speculation on my side, and again, this is a preference thing, but I do feel that certain characters, their abilities are super underwhelming, and really the primary way in which you play them is simply just to deal your damage with your gunplay, with your weapons, which yes, arguably that is the best part of the game at the moment right now for me now. But again, if you have this class identity and you have these classes with all these diverse abilities, you have certain classes which incorporate that ability into the identity of the character very well, and it augments the gunplay in a good way, where in certain cases I struggle to see how this class's abilities actually make the gunplay better or make the character better. I'm not going to pick on any character specifically and say this one was good or this one was bad, and I definitely think that this is a preference thing. So I think overall, just for me, the thing that wasn't good is that we did have this situation where you had this massive difference where something like Glay, or in my opinion Bunny, was exceptionally well designed and really featured a good selection of skills which worked into the gunplay and changed the way, like, you play Bunny like no other class. And again, I think it's very difficult to design like this if your idea is quantity over quality. And again, I'm not diminishing the work that the developers are doing here, but if the aim here is to have 100 different classes or different characters in 2 years time, then you are going to have this issue where some of these classes will not matter, will not be interesting to play, will not be strong, and will not have good abilities. And in that case, it's sad to me that development time went to them, and that was what we got as an end. And then lastly, and this is one that you might differ in opinion about, but also unfortunately one that might not actually be able to change up until now and the release of the game, is that overall the quest design and the way in which you actually progress in this game is boring. I'm sorry to say, it really is, and I tried to enjoy it as much as I could. I played 4 characters up to level 10. I played 1 character into, I think, like late 20s or something like that. And having to essentially redo all of the same thing all the time, the only thing that made it, barely, doable was the fact that we had this huge amount of double or triple or quadruple XP, whatever you want to call it. So the shit was going fast. And secondly, because I did enjoy the gunplay as much as I did. The quest design essentially pulls from a pool of go to this point, activate this button, and then at that point it's go to the next point and activate that button, or stay at that point for 2 minutes while protecting it, or take a portal to another area, kill a bunch of enemies, and come back. That's pretty much it. There really isn't anything different. Yes, every area that you go to, essentially you pop out and then it goes kill 0 of 20 enemies, and then you start racking up the kills, and those enemies essentially, like as soon as you've killed like the 6 guys that are there, then 5 new ones fucking teleport in and you kill them, but that's it. Every once in a while there's like a boss who has a fucking different color life bar and is a little bit tougher, and I know I'm being fucking rough now, but the thing is that part of the game is a snooze fest. It's terrible. And I don't know, being this deep into the design of this, what they would essentially do to change this. But there's, I suppose I fucking hate escort quests, but there's none of that. Material gathering quests, whatever. But the general thing is that you essentially repeat this, extremely dull set of objectives. And once you have to do this 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, because you're going to be doing this on multiple characters, and there isn't a choose path A or choose B kind of situation. This is it. It's the same shit the whole time. I think that's going to get monotonous as hell. Bundle that in with the fact that this game has this massive open world that you teleport into from a hub, a main base, and then you move around and there's checkpoints and there are waypoints. It feels really dull and unlived in. It's something that I spoke about on stream, and actually it was surprising to me how many people understood exactly what I meant even before I finished my point. But when you look at games like, and again, this is not I'm comparing this to other games and that's why this is bad or anything like that, but let's use something like Destiny as an example. So Destiny's open world, when you go into the EDZ, when you go into Cosmodrome or whatever, and you move around in that space, you will find enemies walking around and dudes coming out of fucking caves and all of that, and the world seems lived in. Likewise, when you kill a bunch of enemies, a dropship will fly in and a bunch of dudes will drop out of the dropship. But the whole idea that it gives you is that there's this ecosystem that exists, there's this thing that's happening in the background even if you're not there. Whereas with the First Descendants world, once you start doing these waypoint quests, once you start moving through it, every single fucking encounter in this game is enemies teleporting in from somewhere. The world feels like essentially this empty fucking box that you move around in, and when you get to point A has a trigger where 5 enemies teleport in and you have to kill them, and after you kill those 5 enemies, then the queue is for another 6 enemies to teleport in and you kill them. This is really sad for me about this, because the problem here is this is an exceptionally fun game to shoot in and to use your abilities and to figure your class out and do that. But the things that you do while you are figuring out this and while you are enjoying those guns are boring as fuck. And that then brings us to the worrisome part, the thing that I'm concerned about with the release of the First Descendant. I think you guys would have guessed what it is by now, and I will just put it under one sort of label and we'll talk about monetization. Now, this is going to be a free-to-play game when it comes out, and Nexon will be looking to make their money from selling additional characters, most likely, and also selling cosmetics for those characters. And then I think where the majority of where I think they are thinking where their money is going to come from is in ways in which you can affect the speed at which you do things in this game. Now, in the beta itself, as mentioned, there were 10 different classes that were able to be played. You started off with 3, and then through the course of the beta, you could unlock the materials needed to unlock some of the other classes. And they even created a fast track mode specifically just for the beta, which simplified a lot of this. Basically, what it boils down to is if you want to unlock a different character, then there are some materials you have to farm in the overworld. There are some bosses you have to kill to get their materials. And then last but not least, when you get all of those things together, you pay a cash amount, and then it takes a certain amount of time. In this case, in the beta, I believe it was 8 hours that you had to wait in real time, 8 hours, and then that character would become available and you could switch them and you could play it. Now, I think, and this is pure speculation from my side, this has not been confirmed by the developer and certainly not by anybody that I've seen, but I think that what we're going to see in terms of monetization here, for sure, amongst all the other things that I mentioned, is there's going to be ways for you to fast track this research, just like there was in the beta. There's going to be ways for you to just outright buy either the materials or just the characters straight up. And then getting on to the point of characters which you do have, they have ruins, and those ruins can be upgraded with raw materials, which once again can also be farmed in the overworld, or I think these will also be sold in the shop. Now, let me get this straight off the bat. Let me explain. I don't have a problem with this, because this entire system that I've just explained right now means that there's nothing stopping me from spending the time to get this unlocked if I'm a free-to-play player. I understand that the studio has to make their money somehow, and I want them to make their money if it's a quality product, because they deserve that. But the issue that I have is the design decisions that are fueled by monetization like this. During the beta, we had access to, I think, quadruple XP, because it seemed like it was double XP stacking on double XP. That doesn't matter even if it was just double XP. The point is, we had an extremely easy way of getting from level 1 to 7, and then, getting all your abilities unlocked, and then getting later on, and then starting to get access to better areas because of your level and because of the gear that's dropping from there, and farming this out. If the game contains ways in which you can get this material unlocked faster so either to, you know, upgrade your ruins quicker or to unlock other characters better, then that directly incentivizes the developer to throttle how much you can get of these things based on real time and based on paying for free. It works in their favor to make certain items, certain material, and certain things drop either very seldomly or only from certain activities or only at certain times or certain triggers, because that directly makes you as a free-to-play player play it and go, fuck, this is going to take me another 8 hours to do that, and then decide to whip out the old credit card. Now again, I know that this is a very me thing that I'm explaining here, and some people will say, well, it doesn't matter because I can earn this over time and I can, you know, play it however I want to, and this shit doesn't affect me. But again, it's just that we have to remember that these two things, the level of monetization and what that results in, the drip feeding of whether that is materials or anything like that, and how the game respects your time, is directly tied to one another. This is the part where it can become quite predatory in my mind. And yes, I understand that there are all these, you know, different clarifications of pay to win versus pay to fucking proceed or pay to fast or whatever you want to call it. But nonetheless, we can, I think, all agree that this kind of monetization directly feeds into the development of the game and into the choices that they make with regards to drops and time spent. I hope that I'm blowing it out of proportion, and as the developer Nexon themselves have specified specifically in tweets as well as in interviews about the game, is that they're looking at games of this type that are out there and looking at ways of emulating how those games are monetizing themselves and not to be predatory. So that is really the only thing that I can hope for, and I'm fully willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and see what we get down the line. But that's gonna be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if you were one of the lucky ones to get into the beta. Unfortunately, as mentioned, it was only on Steam, so I'm sure there's a whole bunch of my console bros out there who didn't get a chance. But overall, whether you played it or whether you've seen footage, whether you've listened to the things that I've said, you know, how do you feel about the First Descendant and its hopefully impending release? Specifically about the release of the game, that hasn't been made clear yet. It is slated for 2023, but there is, I think, a lot of work required on this, and I would hope that the developer concentrates on that and doesn't try to force for a release within a specific window. Realistically, I think we're probably looking at a Q2, Q3 launch for this, and I think that gives them a fair amount of time to look at the feedback that they got from videos like this, but also the players on the Discord and everything, and hopefully act accordingly. But that's it. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world, and until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.